Welcome to The Rabbi and the Shrink, a podcast about everyday ethics unscripted. I am Dr. Margarita Guri, CSB, Dr. Reshu, and my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
Today's a special episode. After much begging, the rabbi agreed to be the sole guest, as I wanted him to be highlighted. When I started this podcast,
S-O-U-L, sole guest.
Yeah, funny man. When I started this podcast idea a while ago, I guess the idea came in November around my Thanksgiving table. And I thought I have to do something to help people think better and act better in America and maybe globally. We want global domination for ethics and graciousness in the
You're the one, doctor. You're the one to make it happen.
Thank you, sir. So I thought, I'm going to do this. And I thought, you know what? If I'm going to have any partner in the world, it's going to be Rabbi Yonason. So I'm here to say I am delighted and honored that not only did you say yes to joining, but we've made this a go. We're now in double digits. We've done around 26 episodes now, and I am just delighted. Rabbi, I wanted to start off by saying the thing I love about you the most is that you have this clarity and wisdom. And we're living in a time when compassion and intellect seem to be split, especially in the world of ethics. And I think you have made it a beautiful connection. So Rabbi, take it away. We talked about what you wanted to start. I'm going to make this the Rabbi show. What do you want to talk about today, sir?
Well, before we start, I would like to just get on the record that at some point before too long, I intend to do to you what you're about to do to me. So we will turnabout is fair play. But I'd like to maybe just riff on what you just said, this distinction between compassion and intellect. I think there's actually a deficit of both in the world right now. But I actually just worked on an article about the difference between compassion and kindness. What is kindness? Kindness is free giving without calculation, without structure, without limits. And therefore, kindness is more of an impulse that we want to develop in ourselves. But at the same time, we want to temper that impulse with judgment. And that's really what, from a Jewish point of view, that's what compassion is. It is a response to a need. It is kindness that is filtered through sound judgment and discipline. So for instance, if I'm walking down the street and I'm passing a liquor store and a fellow steps forward, doesn't look like he's in very good shape, smells of alcohol, and says, could you give me $10 for some food? So to give him $10 is an act of kindness. To take him and get him a meal is an act of compassion. Because giving him the money, there's no guarantee he's going to use it in his own best interest. And so having both of those components, cultivating our natural impulse to be kind, and alongside that, developing the judgment and the discipline based in intellect to know what the compassionate response is, that's what really enables us to make the best contribution we can to a healthier, more vibrant, more integrated society.
Oh, see, that's why I picked him. I think the whole idea of compassion, though, as an impulse, some people say, well, if it's an impulse, does that mean it's an instinct? We're born with it? What do you say to that?
I think we are born with it. There's actually a fascinating study I heard where they had little children, I forget, maybe like 4 or 5 years old. And they had different exercises with them where they could get rewards and have candies which they could eat, or they could feed those candies to puppets. And they videoed them, and then they studied their expressions. They've got all this software now for processing emotions. And they found that the children registered more joy feeding the puppets than eating the candy themselves. And it just goes to show that we are hardwired to be kind, to be compassionate. We take more joy from giving others joy than we do from keeping it for ourselves. And we unlearn that as we grow up. So one thing we have as a society, we have to figure out what are we doing that is uprooting that impulse or quashing that impulse, and what can we do to get it back?
All right. So what I'm going to say is, first off, if you want to read what the good rabbi has to offer, go to YonasonGoldson.com. I'm going to put some links here for y'all. He's got a TED Talk. He's got what you've only written 6 books. Is that it?
I published 6. I've written more.
Only published 6. All right. And he's got a bunch on the deck. I'm teasing him because he's always writing. He's a natural born writer. He's written white papers and all that. I'm going to put all the links in there. You've got to check it out. So let's start at the beginning. If we're going to work on not unteaching compassion and help people learn how to think and teach thinking in business and at home, let's start at the basics. What are ethics, and how does that relate to morality and legality? You address that beautifully in your writings. Let's just start off from that.
Yeah, that's it gets us into the weeds a little bit.
I'm good at the weeds, sir.
We need a weed whacker. So from a purely etymological point of view, in terms of the development of language, the word ethics and the word morals come from the same place. One comes through the Greek, one comes through the Latin. So if you go back to the origins, there's really no distinction between them. However, in terms of contemporary usage, particularly with respect to a word like moralizing, the way I would like to frame it is that morality is a set of values that is handed down from a higher authority. And certainly in Jewish tradition, by the way, you complimented me on my wisdom, and I appreciate the compliment. It's not my wisdom.
But aren't you wise enough to recognize the ages of learning?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to be able to study for many, many years and teach for many, many years. And of course, you learn much more teaching than you do studying.
Isn't that the truth?
That's another topic.
Yes.
But I'm simply communicating the reservoir of wisdom that I've just sipped from. There's a whole ocean out there beyond anything I'm capable of communicating, but it's not my wisdom. I'm just channeling it as best I can.
I will respectfully disagree, but I accept your honest and humble opinion as wrong. But go ahead.
We can fight this out another later day.
We will. Anyway, go ahead.
The Judaism teaches that wisdom is something that is handed down from above. And that's really a critical principle in and of itself. Because if you say that wisdom and values and principles are things that we can develop on our own, then you may come to your conclusions, I may come to my conclusions. And there's really no way of resolving them as long as we can defend our positions from a place of logic and intellectual consistency. There's no way to really determine who's right, who's wrong, who has the higher moral ground. The problem is we don't all agree on the higher authority. We're living in a world where you have different religions, you have no religions, you have different interpretations of religions. And so we simply have to deal with that reality. And that's where I think that ethics is really of primary importance. Because whereas morality in this formulation is something that's handed down from on high, ethics I see as something that we try to generate upward from those common sensitivities. Immanuel Kant basically talked about taking what is personal to me my intuitions, my moral, ethical intuitions, and then trying to extend them, extrapolate into the universal from the personal. And while that system doesn't work 100%, I think it's a useful model for us to come together, to have these kinds of conversations, which is why we're having this podcast, so that we can try to find that common ground. We can try to articulate common values and work together to create a kind of ethical discipline that will serve all of us together. I think you're muted, Doctor.
I am. My dog was barking. Bravo.
I get that reaction sometimes.
My dog was excited by your wisdom. What can I say? I'm just teasing you now. I mean, no disrespect when I disagree on the wisdom, but I still think you have at least some of that on your own. I think that what you speak so very well. Why is it that we can't come to the basic agreement on ethics, though? I mean, if it's come down through the ages, why are we not listening? What's missing?
3 letters. It's a complex that we all suffer from. It's called EGO. There's truth, there's wisdom, and then there's what I want truth to be and what I want wisdom to be. And I know from, I grew up in the 70s, which was called the me generation. And I think everybody thought that was such a good idea that we never really changed from that. We are obsessed with ourselves. I mean, relative truth is a term that was very popular when I was in college. And that just handicaps us. Because if we don't believe in absolutes, then we can spin anything to be the way we want it to be. The alternative facts. I mean, what does that even mean? Fake news. I mean, we're living in a world where people are less and less concerned with reality, with factuality. I mean, it's very difficult for us to come together as a society if we can't agree on any kind of moral or ethical axioms, if we can't even agree on what reality is. And, one of the most fascinating, I talk about this in my book, Proverbial Beauty, that Albert Einstein, years after he had published the theory of relativity, his theories of relativity, he expressed a what's the word I'm looking for? He regretted that he had actually promoted this philosophy because he saw what was happening. That once the world saw that physical reality is relative, it was only a short step towards moral relativism. And even though Einstein was not religious in a conventional sense, he believed in a higher truth, he believed in a higher power, and he saw the way things were headed. And how many decades ago was that? I see in the note, Kimi's asking, is there a difference between fact and truth? That's a really fascinating question.
And reality, fact, truth, and reality.
Yeah. Certainly there's an example. One of the great thinkers of the last generation, Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, he talks about how the Hebrew word emes, which we translate as truth, does not literally translate. And one of my rabbis gives this example. That if you're standing on a street corner and somebody comes flying past you, running breakneck speed, and a moment later, somebody else comes by holding a knife and says, "Which way did that guy go?" What do you say? Well, if the guy turned right, the proper thing to say, he went left. Why? Because I don't want to be I don't want to contribute to murder, to violence. So I told a factual lie. But philosophically, the answer I gave was true. Because ultimately, we are supposed to protect people. We are supposed to propagate good in the world. We are not supposed to contribute to violence or harm. So in this particular case, the factual answer was the false answer because it takes the world in a direction that is not the direction we should be going. The non-factual answer is the true answer. Now, of course, you have to be very careful with this because this can lead to the kinds of rationalization where the ends justify the means, and we don't really believe that either. So there's a tremendous amount of nuance, and this is why we've said again and again, there's no app for being ethical. Every situation is different, and we have to develop our moral muscles and our ethical mindset so that we can grapple with these gray areas, because that's what it means to be ethical.
Wow. Where to go from that? I think that as a psychologist, I know how easy it is for us to twist facts and to see things from our own, not only bias, from our desperately needed way of looking at the world. That it's not my fault, it wasn't my mistake, that it was all mom's fault or dad's fault or whatever. I do believe that it takes a lot of courage. And I love the idea of you encouraging us all to have better ethical muscles. What can we do to get stronger in this post-COVID return as we morphing? And Kimmy had a specific question. Determining how to handle coworkers or associates who hold varying degrees of commitment to social community infection protection. That's a reality, but it's based on facts and science. What do you suggest people do about that? That's a big dilemma.
Yeah, it is. And, in my home, my wife and I got vaccinated at the earliest opportunity. My 29-year-old son, who is with us for a few more weeks, he has not gotten vaccinated. And he has made a, I believe, responsible, researched, informed decision based upon the comorbidities, based upon his age, based upon his health, based upon the unknowns of the vaccine, which, let's be honest, we don't know what might happen years down the line from having received a vaccine. So I can't really fault him for his decision because he hasn't made it emotionally. He's looked at his situation, and while I wouldn't necessarily come to the same conclusion, I can respect the way he got there. And he's still cautious. He goes indoors in public places. He typically wears a mask, even though that's been relaxed, at least for the moment. It's the people who arrive at different conclusions but get there through intellectual integrity. We can respect it, even if we disagree. It's what I draw from Kimi's question is really, how do you deal with people who don't make their decisions rationally? And I'm not sure I have a good answer for that. Some people can be educated. Some people don't want to be educated. And then we have to make decisions. What people do we let into our circle to the extent that we can control that? How much do we limit our own interactions? Maybe I'm not going to go places where I'm going to have to encounter people who are doing things. And this really extends beyond masks and beyond vaccinations. Because if you think about a lack of ethics as a kind of virus, How to protect our own ethical immune system if we have to deal with people who are basically unethical. Jim Rohn says you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think that's just a wonderful insight that we have to choose our associations. And this is in person and it's also online. It's the media we consume. We have to be selective about the people we let into our lives and let into our bubble, because we will be influenced by them. And of course, sometimes we don't have complete control. We just have to do the best we can.
Well, Sue has a question in Anaya. Sue says, what about your son's role as a carrier that can or will infect others? And I think that's one of the questions that I'm sure he researched. So what about that?
Then that goes to how communicative is the virus, in what settings. I mean, outdoors, there seems to be minimal danger. Indoors, there's more danger. Again, I'm not advocating his position. I am merely using him as an example of someone who worked his way to a decision and based upon his understanding of all the variables. And there's certainly room to debate whether it's the right thing to do or not. And sometimes we simply have to accept that other people are going to reach conclusions different from our own. And what we want to do with that, maybe, even though I can respect the way he got there, maybe I simply can't accept that I'm going to be in contact with somebody who made that decision.
See, and I'll speak to that in my life. I got the vaccine right away. My daughter got it when she could. She was younger, so not as eligible. Being old, I was on a top list. This is one of the lists you don't want to be a priority for, but I was. I think that some of our dearest friends have chosen not to be vaccinated. They also choose not to wear masks. And so my granddaughter, who has an immune system that is not as strong as it could be, we then wear masks wherever we go and have to be careful about who we introduce her to and how we introduce her to these things. And our friends have been really lovely about having these discussions, why they've made their decision, and they understand that means that we can't see them. And it's been really nice being able to have these discussions and the why. And so luckily there's something in the world called Zoom. And so we're able to communicate, and my granddaughter can still be with her best girlfriend in the world. But you don't have to wear a mask on Zoom now, do you?
That's right. So it's interesting. In Israel, and this is sort of tangential, but I think it's related. In Israel, peanut allergies are virtually unknown because one of the most popular kids snack there is something called bamba, which is, it looks like a Cheeto, but it's peanut based.
I like bamba. It's
every Israeli kid is eating bamba the moment they can get a hard food in their mouth. So what's happened, what's different in America is that because of the fear of peanut allergies, we eliminated peanuts, which prevented little children from developing the immunity, which perpetuated an increase in peanut allergies. So there's this peculiar phenomenon where overprotecting ourselves ends up putting us more at danger. But then you've got the added problem is now every airline, every restaurant, every food service provider is now operating under an onus of added restriction and limitation because of increased sensitivity that started from what was, I think, really a misguided attempt to protect people.
And yet I went flying the other day, and in line to get onto the airplane, there was a whole family eating peanut butter jelly sandwiches. And there had already been an announcement, do not bring it into the plane because we have a peanut allergy on the plane today. So, everyone saw them eating it. So I'm assuming maybe as long as it's not I don't know what the sphere of harm is. I mean, how close do you have to be? Is it just, I don't know. So I think it's interesting. And the airline did nothing. Several people pointed it out, and they were all in up in arms. And mind you, some of those people were up in arms wearing their masks like this, not covering their nose. So sometimes I think we're busy not being sure and being half compliant. And before we go to your thing about compliance, Aya has an interesting issue to address for that. Do facts and truth relate to our assumptions and beliefs, or how do they relate? Facts and fiction and truth relate to our assumptions and beliefs.
This actually gets into a really interesting discussion. I heard Jordan Peterson talking about this, that we have so much sensory input coming at us every moment that if we would have to process everything, our brains would simply shut down. We couldn't handle it. And so how do we handle it? Our subconscious mind, based upon our experience, based upon all our past, subconsciously, we choose what to filter out and what to pay attention to. And that means that we aren't seeing everything. We aren't perceiving, we aren't processing everything that's coming at us. And maybe there's something really important that our subconscious has chosen not to recognize. So we literally can't see or can't perceive what's in front of us that might be very important. And now we're basing our decisions and our assumptions on perceptions that are inadequate and perhaps very inaccurate. So it's really the willingness to hear, to see, to listen, to expose ourselves to ideas, to input that takes us outside of our comfort zone, that challenges our preconceptions. I mean, this is all why it's so important that people from different political points of view talk to each other and don't simply shut one another down because you're one of those, I'm one of these, we can't talk to each other, I'm right, you're wrong. Again, my own origin story of graduating college with a degree in English, going hitchhiking across country, going backpacking across Europe, ending up through a strange series of events in a religious seminary, and discovering that this rabbi who looked like an anachronism from 18th century Europe sounded like a professor of philosophy at Johns Hopkins University, which turned out that he was. And he shattered my stereotypes. And he forced me to consider a whole worldview that I never would have chosen to look at if not for being put in that situation or ending up in that situation, and at least having the willingness to consider ideas and points of view that were very much opposed to my own. And that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I discovered that that's essential to the whole Jewish tradition. We have two great schools of learning 2,000 years ago. And they had very different perspectives. And history says that when they debated in the study hall, they became so impassioned, it was as if they fought with swords and spears. But when they left the study hall, they were friends because they respected each other. They understood one another because they made the effort to understand one another. And so we still study their debates And it has direct relevance to our way of life because of the intellectual integrity that they both had. And that's what lays the moral foundations of our whole system.
Well, Aya makes a comment in terms of science. This reminds me of logic from the proof of contradiction.
Logic from the proof of contradiction. Well, sure. I mean, the term that I encountered recently is constructive disagreement.
Right.
That when the high court would rule on a capital case, and you had 23 sages, 23 judges, and you needed a supermajority, because we want to be very careful before we give anybody the death penalty. But if every single member, if they had unanimous consent that the defendant was guilty, they would not give the death penalty. Because if nobody can find an argument in this person's favor, we don't trust our own objectivity. We suspect some unconscious bias in ourselves, and we would rather let a likely person go free than take that tiny, tiny chance that we have overlooked something and would be condemning an innocent person to death.
Wow, that's a whole different point of view, isn't it? When I was, I'm Catholic, so I was getting confirmed. The priest, Father Juan Sosa, made us all go out in the community and find somebody that we disagreed with vehemently on one topic, and then interview them and come back to class and present it lovingly. He said, because you cannot be part of the Catholic Christian community unless you can speak lovingly about someone's opinion that is 100% opposite from yours. And he said, 1,000%, it doesn't matter. Find someone that you feel like you want to silence and get to know them. And I think that he might have been Jewish in another life. Who knows, right? That was pretty good. All right. So from Jenny, we have, please talk about how the untruths or partial truths that we're fed by government agencies, or the media affect us when trying to determine how to grapple with ethical decisions.
Yeah, that's really a powerful question. Because the best lie, right? As an ethicist, I'm going to teach you now how to lie. The best lie stays as close to the truth as possible. In fact, the best lie is when you actually say the truth in a way that makes it sound like you don't mean it. So if somebody accuses me of stealing, did you steal that? Oh yeah, I stole that. That's the best lie, because I told the truth, but I made it sound like I didn't. Right? If something is too far-fetched, if it's too far from the truth, then it's easy to disprove. It's easy to dismiss. But when you cherry pick the truth, when you only take those facts and those arguments that support your position, this is why we have these passionate debates about what's best for the planet. We're talking about something like climate change. Well, there's what's his name? Michael Schellenberger, I think. He's one of the most prominent and passionate advocates for addressing climate change. And he says the people who are doing the most harm to the climate change movement are climate change zealots, because they are overstating the case. They're misrepresenting the facts. They're not authentically making the argument that's going to convince people. And so what they do is they discredit the entire movement. So you really end up doing more harm than good, even if maybe I can win this argument in the short term. Maybe I can make my agenda look like there's more to it. But it's like anything else in ethics. You can win a small battle by being unethical, but chances are you're going to lose the war. And that the short-term gains are generally going to be dramatically offset by long-term losses. Whereas with your ethical, it's just the opposite. It might appear that you're sacrificing something in the short run, but you're going to gain so much more in the long run.
And how are we to, keeping with her comment, how are we to make decisions based on information that we're not sure is factual or even true?
That's hard, and it's getting harder because the media outlets are getting increasingly unreliable. For years, my conservative friends gave me grief because I listened to NPR, and my liberal friends gave me grief because I watched Fox News. And I said, it's the best I can do to try to get some kind of a balance. Well, now I hardly listen to either one of them because it's like they're reporting on two different planets. You can't even recognize the same story. I mean, I posted a video a couple of weeks ago about 3 headlines from 3 different news outlets on the same event. That sounded, it's like they were in 3 different places at 3 different times. I mean, it's there is some hope in alternative media. It takes a lot of time and effort to seek out the podcasts, to seek out the independent sources that are reliable, and to invest the time in actually following them. But either we do that, or we simply have to reserve judgment because we can't be confident in the information that we're being fed.
Well, Sue had a good solution. Find some people you've grown to respect and listen to them.
Yeah, I mean that's thank you, Sue, because that's I should have said it as simply as that. It's all about trust. And again, this is another element of ethics. If I'm seen as being ethical, I will be trusted. And as long as I continue to earn that trust, then I have the opportunity to positively influence others. And if I find people I trust that are trustworthy, then I can listen to them. I can accept what they have to say in good conscience and base my decisions on them. But that requires a certain amount of continual reassessment because some people can start out with good, they can start out trustworthy and they may not always stay that way.
And it can happen to all of us. That zealot kind of thinking is amazingly blinding, and sometimes it's insidious. We don't know what's happening. Sue goes on to say, we've gone from reporting what happened, deciding how to support the interpretation of what we want to see as what happened. And I think that we often it's confirmation bias. We want to confirm that what we think, believe, and want is real.
Yeah, and it's, it goes back to the ego. Once I make a commitment to believe in something, and especially once I've said it and once I've defended it. I mean, have you ever been in the situation where you're having an impassioned debate or discussion or argument, and you're getting a little heated, and suddenly it dawns on you that you're wrong?
Yes.
And it's happened to me.
Yes.
And what happens in that moment? It's very likely we double down and we start arguing our case even harder because I don't want to look so foolish that I made this impassioned case for something and now suddenly I'm saying, oh, you know what? I got it wrong. It's that fear of being seen as flawed, as mistaken, as on the wrong side of things. We just don't like to admit it when we've made a mistake. And as my college professor, Max Bird, said, and I have remembered this for 40 years, he said, I don't understand people who complain about being disillusioned. I would like to be relieved of my illusions. I mean, what do you want? Do you want to find out you were wrong, or do you want to continue to be wrong?
Yeah,
but when the emotions got that decision, and we're right back where we started.
I think everyone needs to have someone say, really, you're still going to stick to that? we need people who are going to disagree with it and say, I think you're missing the boat there. So Jenny says she had liked her answer from earlier. I think the rabbi and the shrink have to start a news podcast and teach the media how to report ethically. I think I would love to have a chance to have a discussion with them on how to do that and how to keep yourself honest, because sometimes I think it comes from passion and from good intentions that they get steered wrong. Sue says, ironically, the same logic and purpose of movie critics. Find a critic or rating system you agree with in general. Let them guide your time, commitment to viewings.
That's a really interesting part right there.
It is.
Did you ever watch a 5-star rated movie that you thought was just awful?
All the time.
So, I mean, apparently some people liked it, and that's fine. We don't all have to agree, because this is a matter of taste. It's a matter of personal predisposition, personal opinion. But to be able to separate that from fact, that's what ethics is all about.
I think that keeping ourselves honest for the need for speed. George May had said greed, speed, haziness, and laziness are the main reasons why we misbehave. And Sue was pointing out, charge, we have this need to do things quickly. I add, since I lived in Miami, craziness. That frenzied something, not mental illness. I'm talking about just that sense is, now we've got to do this and I want to be right. And I think that we can have a culture that's supercharged with following, swimming down, not up to the surface. I mean, I think that becomes a cultural phenomenon.
It's very funny you say that, because I grew up in Southern California, which is just the opposite. It's just chill, laid back, everything's fine. You go too far that direction, that doesn't work either. But what's interesting is there's always going to be this tension, and there should be, that's the point, there should be a tension between being charged and being chill. And when we try to eliminate that tension, that's where we really get into trouble.
I certainly agree.
Accept it, embrace it, manage it, and deal with it.
All right. Well, we could talk to you forever. I think it's time for the word of the day. And since you're the guest and the word of the day guy, take it away, Rabbi.
Okay. Well, it actually fits very well into our conversation.
It does, doesn't it?
It is
timely.
Anucleate. So everybody knows what a nucleus is. It's the center, it's the core. Some things don't have a nucleus. And enucleate means lacking a nucleus. And it's interesting because in biology, the red blood cells in our bodies, in mammalian bodies, they lack a nucleus. And that's actually beneficial, because our capillaries are so narrow that if there were a nucleus, the red blood cells wouldn't be able to fit through them. Because they lack a nucleus, they can stretch out, they can elongate, and they can slip through. So what's that nucleus at the heart of most human beings? We're back to the ego. It's that sort of hard core that makes us inflexible, that prevents us from adapting, that gets us stuck so that we can't get through those narrow or those difficult passageways. So while it is very important to have a sense of self, it's also important to understand how we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And that the flexibility to play my part, whatever it is, sometimes I'm going to get out in front and be the first violinist in the orchestra. And sometimes I'm just going to be, the member of the choir, adding my 2%, so that we can all together create beautiful music. And the ability to be flexible, to accept the role that's the right role for the right person, the right time. That's really how we make the greatest contribution and ultimately fulfill our own self potential and sense of purpose.
I was muted again, sorry. As my mother used to say, and sometimes the best way we can contribute is to be a good member of the audience, to behave well and to let them do their thing without the noises and the distractions. And I think that sometimes we feel that if we're not front and center, that we don't have a role, but everyone, as you pointed out, indeed has a role. That was terrific, Rabbi.
I love the way you said that, by the way.
Pardon?
I love the way you just said that, because it took my point a step further, that what's the point of performing if there's no audience?
Absolutely. And Sue has a question. That is a topic for another day, and I think it's a good one. How do you know what role is right for you? You asked that. It was brilliant. I think we should do that again. How do we know what role is right for us and in what contexts, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It is an important question, and we will save it for another.
Thank you, Sue. It will. All right. So now, Rabbi,
I think
last words of wisdom, sir.
I was going to say it's up to you to have the last word.
Well, yes, and I'll say something, but is there some last thing you want to say? We don't want you to end on the word of the day and the reaction to that. What's one thing you want everyone to go home with, a takeaway?
Well, I'll fall back on one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain. He said, "Always do good. You'll gratify some and astonish the rest."
I love that.
You know, if sometimes when you see somebody do something that is really selfless, really pure, maybe not something really dramatic. I've told this story in our show before, but I just love the story that Simon Sinek tells. He was walking down the sidewalk talking to a friend, and they saw this guy in front of them. A hole had torn in his backpack, and stuff was falling out. And so as they talked, they reached down, they picked it up, they caught up with him and said, "Hey, you lost this stuff, and watch out, you're going to lose more." And he said, "Thank you." And they walked on their way, and at the next traffic light, somebody came up to them and said, "Hey, I saw what you did for that guy back there. That was really cool." And well, why would anybody not do that? But sometimes we just get so caught up in ourselves that we just don't think about doing the obvious. And every time someone does something just a little bit above and beyond, that reminds us that we can do the same thing. And we can expect more from ourselves. We tend to expect more from others and less from ourselves. We'd be a lot better off if we'd expect more from ourselves and maybe a little less from others.
Well, that was beautiful. So then my last word.
Do you have a last word?
Always, always. I'm never short an opinion, sir. That's a joke between my twin sister and I, because we're never short an opinion. I think that other than the fact that I was brilliant to have chosen you as a partner and to have the wisdom to invite you to be a perpetual contributor to the podcast, I could talk to you all day. My bottom line is kind of where you started. And I'm going to ask all the listeners everywhere, where are your ethics? What's feeding them? How are you sharing them? How are you making the world a better place in the various roles that you play? Are you the leader right now or a good member of the audience? So I asked yourself to do a little thinking. What are your morals, your ethics? How are you handling the law, even if it doesn't make sense? So that's my final word. And we look forward to seeing you all. We have a very faithful audience, and we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. And even when the rabbi is not there, I'm still going to meet. And then we have sometimes we're going to ask questions of y'all and get your input. And those will not be publicized. Oh, and Malcolm says best session ever. Yeah, because it's our rabbi. And Kimi says have a lovely week. Everyone, many blessings. Be safe. And as the rabbi always says, ethically yours. Take care.